Who wrote the biblical books of Luke, Acts? Some scholars, like Bart Ehrman, have argued that the Gospels were originally written anonymously and were later attributed to people that probably didn't write them. But is this correct? One important piece of evidence comes from the early church writers who believe that Luke was the author of Luke, Acts. Early church leaders like Irenaeus, Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, and Origen explicitly said that Luke wrote these books. Irenaeus even mentioned that Luke, who was a companion of Paul, recorded the gospel that Paul preached. We can also find evidence in the writings of the early church leaders where they directly quoted or referred to Luke, Acts, showing that they considered it to be authoritative. For example, Polycarp of Smyrna, in a letter to the Philippians, mentioned things that closely matched the Gospel of Luke, showing that he knew and respected it. Ignatius of Antioch alluded to a passage from Luke 24, talking about Jesus' appearance after his resurrection and the physical nature of his body. While Ignatius didn't specifically say that Luke wrote it, the similarity suggests that he knew about Luke's account. Justin Martyr in his writings referred to the memoirs, which were the Gospels, saying that they were written by the apostles and their followers. He even mentioned Jesus' agony in the garden, sweating great drops of blood, which matches the scene in Luke's Gospel where Jesus prays in the Garden of Gethsemane. Although Justin didn't explicitly attribute this passage to Luke, his reference to the memoirs and the similarities with Luke's story suggest a connection between Justin's teachings and the Gospel of Luke. Furthermore, the fact that Luke, Acts is included in list of accepted biblical books further supports Luke's authorship. The Muratorian Fragment, a document from the 2nd century, includes both Luke's Gospel and Acts, showing that the early church recognized Luke as the author. Eusebius of Caesarea, a well-known church historian, also quoted and referred to various early Christian writers who affirmed Luke's authorship. Finally, there is the compelling fact that no anonymous copies of the Gospel of Luke have ever been discovered. Every existing ancient manuscript attributes authorship to Luke, tracing back to Papyrus 75. The external evidence for Luke's authorship is strong. The manuscript evidence, testimony of the early church leaders, quotes and allusions to Luke, Acts, and its inclusion in accepted list of biblical books all points to Luke, the companion of Paul, as the author of these important texts. This evidence is not only significant and early, but it also comes from various parts of the Roman Empire. This widespread acceptance of Luke, Acts as authoritative provides strong support for Luke's authorship. As St. Augustine argued, we should apply the same standard of evidence to the Gospels as other ancient works, such as those attributed to Hippocrates and Plato. The continuous testimonies throughout history add weight to the authenticity of Luke, Acts. Finally, the dedication of the Gospel of Luke to Theophilus, likely Luke's patron, strengthens the case for the originality of its title. Unlike the other Gospels, Luke explicitly names the individual for whom his Gospel is written. In the words of New Testament scholar Richard Bauckham, the clearest case for an original title is Luke because of the dedication of the work to Theophilus, probably a patron. It is inconceivable that a work with the name dedicee should have been anonymous.